Hello, I'm Helen Leigh-Phippard, and I'm a service user who I work with Alice and Ritika on the PPN Kent, Surrey and Sussex programme. And I have to start by saying I'm a techie, and most of the other service users that I know sigh when I start going all techie with them. And they all say, no, Helen, we don't want to talk about tech. And yeah, tell me that most service users don't like tech. So I have to start by saying that I am a techie. But what I'm going to talk about right now is some of the challenges that I think digital and tech raise for service users and carers. Because usually when I'm in a room and I bring out my tech, other people tell me to put it away, and I think it does raise lots of challenges for service users. And I felt that most people today would be talking about all the opportunities, and I felt it was really important to just raise some of the challenges. I'm going to be talking again at the end of the day about some of the things I've heard, and just comment on some of the issues that I think everything today has raised for me. But right now I'm going to talk about some of the challenges. But I start by saying I'm a techie and I'm a gamer, so I'm definitely not a digital native. I became a gamer after I started having mental health problems. I wasn't a gamer before, but I actually found that gaming helped me deal with some of particularly with hallucinations and voices. I found that once I got absorbed in a game, it was much easier to deal with those. So for me, it's been really helpful. So yeah, if my husband comes home and finds me playing Skyrim, he knows that I'm having a bad day, because I get lost for 3 or 4 hours in a different world. So, also, I will say one thing about some of the issues that were raised this morning. I'm also, when I'm not doing my PPN work, and the other thing that I sometimes do for my local NHS trust is I'm the chair of the service users who get involved in research. So I've also been involved in many, many research projects, testing some of the apps that Andy was talking about. So I've very often been involved in research projects for all kinds of smartphone apps actually recently, for various forms of CBT and mindfulness, and also websites. So maybe later in the day, towards the end of the day, we can talk about those if people have questions. But yeah, I've been involved in some of that. So I have some experience of some of those. So there have actually been some RCTs for various, so you're asking about those. Yeah, there have been some for various smartphone apps, and also for some websites, particularly for things like CBT for psychosis. We've done quite a few of those down in Sussex. But anyway, some of the issues raised by tech. I'm sure you're aware of this anyway, but certainly the confidentiality of data raises all kinds of issues for service users, because we worry all the time about what's going to happen to our data. And particularly in the digital age, as more and more data is being stored. I'm obviously a service user that uses online booking. I have no problems using online access to access my GP surgery, but at the same time, I always tick the box saying I don't want my information shared. So while I have no problem going online, I still don't want my information shared, because I want to know who it's being shared with and where it's going. So I'm very, very wary about that. And also I think service users are really worried about the stigma that comes with their mental health, diagnosis, particularly in physical health settings. For me, I've always found that the worst stigma I ever face around having a mental health diagnosis is in the physical NHS. It's worse than anywhere else I ever go. The stigma you face when you're trying to access medical NHS services is really bad. So I never want them to know about my mental health diagnosis unless I choose to tell them. So I don't want it shared electronically. I want to share it rather than for it to be shared any other way. And also I think there are worries that a mental health diagnosis affects benefits, insurance, all kinds of things. So I think we're very, very wary of sharing that information unless we share it personally ourselves. So I think there's all kinds of issues around confidentiality. The other issue that Amanda just raised was all those apps. I think those apps were apps that the NHS recommends. Well, I don't think most people go to the NHS for your apps. You go to the iTunes store, or you go online. You don't go to the NHS. And when you go to the iTunes store, if you go in and put in, I don't know, anxiety apps or whatever you're looking for, you get thousands of apps, and it's really difficult to know which one to choose. You probably choose the most popular. And lots of those aren't even British. Most of them are American, Chinese, Taiwanese, Korean. And who gets the data on those apps? I mean, I use the migraine app, and I know it's American. So who has the data for that app? So, you have to go into the privacy settings and set your privacy settings very carefully if you don't want the information going all over the world. So you can't assume that the app is British. You can't assume it's endorsed by the NHS. You certainly can't assume it's safe. And I know I was doing some research for this and found all kinds of information about apps that are really harmful, that people have used and have been removed. But yeah, there's no guarantee that anybody's going to get those apps via the NHS. So I think the regulation of apps is a real problem. The other issue is the gender bias in apps. There's a serious gender bias in apps. I don't know if anyone here has read Caroline Criado Perez's book, Invisible Women. If not, I highly recommend it. Particularly the chapter on data bias in apps. There's an exaggerated bias evident in society, particularly a gender bias, and her evidence is that data bias is exaggerated. That gender bias is exaggerated in apps, that it's exaggerated by the people who create the apps. So largely it's men who create apps, and therefore they exaggerate the data bias. And there was a recent case of the Babylon app. Is anyone familiar with that app? It's the app around heart attacks. It was used by GPs in Hammersmith. I'll make sure I get my data right. It was used by GPs in Hammersmith around heart attacks. And they basically put data in for men and for women. The only thing they changed on it was the gender. And women were told that they were having an anxiety attack, and men were told to go to A&E because they were having a heart attack. It was the same data, the only difference was the gender. Really, really interesting. I also came across what initially felt to me a really interesting, a really lovely case of something called a Tom Jones programme in a dementia home in Wales. And initially I was reading about it and thought, this is lovely. It's a care home in Wales where when the residents in the home were becoming distressed, the staff started to play Tom Jones to them, and they became less distressed. So they would play Tom Jones music and they became less distressed. So then they extended the programme and they started to use iPads and Echo Dots and eventually virtual reality. So not only were they playing Tom Jones to them, but they started taking them on country drives with Tom Jones music in virtual reality. And they found that by doing that, they had a massive reduction in the use of antipsychotics. And I thought, this is great. A huge reduction in the use of antipsychotics and a 29% fall in the use of 999 ambulance calls as the patients became so much less distressed. But as I thought about it a bit more, I began to think, well, is this a form of almost brainwashing? It's kind of a form of conditioning of patients, because every time a patient became distressed, they played them Tom Jones and they became less distressed. So on the one hand, it's a good thing, but on the other hand, it's kind of conditioning of patients, because you're playing them something and they're immediately becoming less distressed. So anyway, I find it slightly worrying. I don't know. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? I don't know, but I think it's worrying. And I think it felt to me like a bit like Pavlov's dogs. You're conditioning patients in some way to calm down. But I don't know, I just raised issues. And I also found I also found something called ClinTouch, which is being used here in Manchester. It was developed here in Manchester and is used here in Manchester for psychosis patients. And it's a way of monitoring patients. So it's an app where patients are asked several times a day how they're feeling. And if their responses trigger a certain response, then it suggests that their care coordinator needs to get in touch with them because they're very unwell. And in one sense, that's a good thing. But in another sense, it feels a bit like monitoring somebody. So again, I felt like some of these things feel almost like you're kind of keeping tabs on somebody to a worrying extent, and I'm concerned about how somebody who's paranoid might respond to the being monitored. Yeah. So I kind of feel like they're a double-edged sword. Anyway, they're concerns. I mean, there's the other obvious concern that apps and telemedicine are just a cheap way of fobbing someone off. I had a really interesting example of my daughter, who also has mental health problems, where all the service users I know who are my kind of age all complain about CCBT and telephone CBT. That is just it's just a way of fobbing people off. It's not proper. It kind of relates to what you were saying about how you think people want someone in the room. And that all the computerized psychology is just a way of fobbing people off and giving them a cheap medicine. And then when my daughter was old enough, she moved from CAMS to the local wellbeing service, and so she turned 18, and so they gave her telephone CBT, and she thought it was marvellous because she could schedule her sessions for when she was still in bed. And she lay in bed and did her CBT on the phone. She scheduled it for when I went out to walk the dog, so there was nobody in the house, and she could just lie in bed and do her CBT. And she thought it was marvellous. And that's, it's a generational difference. She thought it was absolutely fabulous and so much better than having to go and see someone face to face. And it's just a generational difference, that if you're middle-aged, you want to go and see someone face-to-face, but if you're 18, there's nothing better than lying in bed and doing CBT in bed, on your phone, and you don't have to face anyone either. And the last thing I just wanted to mention is that I think also, when we're talking about apps and digital technology, that I think the media has a role to play in how people respond to whether people want to take up those kind of technologies. I've been involved in a research program it's I suppose you'd call it a blended technology for I can't name the app and because it's not available yet, but it's a kind of CBT for psychosis, which also involves a website and a smartphone app. And people were not taking it up, not getting involved in the trial until it featured on the One Show. And once it featured on the One Show, and we had one of our peer researchers on the One Show talking about how marvellous it was, and suddenly we had an uptake in lots and lots of people wanting to take part in it. So I probably can mention it because it was on the One Show. You were involved in it, weren't you, Ritika, at one point? Yeah, so it's called Slow-Mo. And we had an increase in uptake when one of our peer researchers was on the One Show talking about how good it was. And then it was tweeted and had many thousands of retweets. And suddenly we had a huge increase in recruitment for it. So I think there is something to say as well for how the media respond to something, how the media promote and respond to something, because then you kind of have a big uptake in how successful something is. I kind of think it's a bit like the kind of negative portrayal at the moment of mindfulness, and we've seen a huge decrease in the uptake of mindfulness locally because the media have such a downer on it right now. So that's it for now.